So we are a bit late for a Shiur this week. In the beginning of the week, I was in Europe, and when I got back, there was so much on my desk, on my table, Shiurim and Shuvas show. Baruch Hashem. It's Thursday night, a bit late for the weekly Shiur, but better late than never. This week we read Parshas Toldos. And in Parshas Toldos, we said many Shiurim usually about Mechiras HaBechorah, but today we're going to deal with a fascinating sugya, primarily the din of Mumrim bebeis Yisrael. What is the din of a Mumar, Meshubad, Kuti, Karaim, Reformed Jews? And this is a very relevant sugya and a very broad-based sugya. Last week, I was in Spain with a group of very choshev American balabatim, and we did a lot of learning. And the focus of the shiurim was the story of the Marranos, the Anusim, the Spanish Inquisition. So, related topics. What's the kesher to this week's parsha? So in this week's parsha, we learn about the Bechorah and primarily about the Brochas. Vayev Yitzchok es Esav kitzayet befiv, v'Rivka oheves es Yaakov. Tagamunkeles kitzayet befiv, v'Rachem Yitzchok es Esav arei mitzedei hava ochil. Yitzchok ate what Esav fed him, and what Esav fed him was the animals that Esav caught in the forest, and he shechted those animals, and he fed Yitzchok. And when Yitzchak wants to bestow his brochas on Esav, v'ata sono kelecha, telyecha, v'kashtecha, v'tzeh soda v'tzuda ritzayid. Rashi says, lashchiz et asakin, sharpen your knife. It should be shchita kshera. It should not be shchita psula. So in Chulin Daf Hey, it is a very clear halacha that shchitas mumar psula. And mumar avodah zorah, if he shechts, it's not shchita kshera, and the meat would be considered nevela. And in Kedushin Aviyut Chesed Aleph, the Gemara says that Esav was Yisrael mumar. So if we combine the psukim of this parsha with the two Gemaras, we have a gewaldige kasha, a real problem. Esav was a mumar, shchitas mumar posul. Is it possible that Yitzchok ate nevela? Well, maybe Yitzchok wasn't aware. But the Gemara says many times in Shas, Chulin Daf Hey, Davov, Dav Zayin, Dalad Hey Vav, 3 times at the beginning of Masechet Chulin, Gittin Dav Zayin, Yevomes, Ksubis, many sources in Shas. Behemten shel tzadikim, ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevit kol al yodam tzadikim atzman lo kol shekein. HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never bring a tzaddik to be over Aveira, even without intention. This question was brought up by the Chidah, Sefer Pesach Einayim, and Masechet Chulin Daf Hey, and the Yismach Moshe. Yismach Moshe was one of the greatest Hasidic masters. He was the great-great-great-grandfather both of the Satmar Rebbe and the Kloisenberger Rebbe, the grandfather of the Yetav Lev, the first Sigeta Rav, Sigeta Rebbe. And the Yismach Moshe asked this very same question. So the Chidah says, maybe when Yitzchok ate what Esav caught, mitzedei have ochil, that was before Esav became a mumar avodah zorah. That's a big doichik. We don't know at what stage Esav started to be a mumar avodah zorah, but in the beginning of the parsha of Yisrael abonim b'kirbo, Rashi brings divrei Chazal, when Rivka ois overes al pischa avodah zorah, Esav mefaches l'tzeis. So he was obsessed with avodah zorah even before he was born. So the Chidah's approach is a doichak. The Yismach Moshe has a fantastic drush, but it's only derech drush. The Yismach Moshe says, we know from the Mekabolim that a big tzaddik, when he eats meat, he could sense and feel who was the shoichet. Not whether the shoichet was Rabbi Avrom or Rabbi Yitzchak or Rabbi Yankov, but whether the shoichet was a tzaddik. He could sense and feel the madreges of the shoichet. So the Yismach Moshe says, Esav obviously was a Rasha, and the Gemara says he was a Mumar and an Ovid Avodah Zorah, but he was makbid in Kvoid Oviv. And Esav knew, he didn't want to offend Yitzchak, he knew that he's a Rasha, he knew that he's a Mumar, and he didn't want to feed his father, his great father, the Tzaddik, Machoros Asuris. So Esav used to ask Yankov to be the Shoichet. Yitzchak eats the meat, and he feels Tam Gan Eden, Me'ein Olam Haba. And when he eats this meat, he knows that the Shoichet is a Tzaddik, Yesod Olam. And he thinks Esav is the Shoichet. And that is why he loved Esav and admired Esav. And the more Lashon Hara he heard about Esav, he just admired him even more, and his admiration grew. He was convinced that Esav is not only a tzaddik, he's a tzaddik nistar. Nobody knows what a tzaddik he is. And that's why Yitzchak ohav es Esav. So that is a hamtzua, creative, a fabulous teretz. And the Yismach Moshe goes on and on with this mahalach b'derech drush. I b'didi talya li b'yoymeli, shtei shuvas b'davar. What is the psul of a mumar regarding shchita? Einoi bar zvicha. If a person doesn't believe in Torah, he doesn't observe mitzvahs, he's not considered a bar zvicha, and therefore shchitos psula. So my argument is, before we had mitzvah shchita, not shaykh to get someone as a bar zvicha. Adayin lo nitna mitzvah zvicha. How could one be a bar zvicha or not be a bar zvicha when the mitzvah of zvicha wasn't even given? It is true. No, and in my Sefer Minchasosh I brought many rayas. Not only Avram, Yitzchak followed in Avram's footsteps, so did Yankov, Imluv and Garti. Rashi brings Taryag mitzvah shamarti. But that is only a midas chosidus. They weren't mechuyev. They had no obligation. Before we had a mitzvah of zvicha, they cannot be a bar zvicha, and therefore there's no chasora in misha einoi bar zvicha, and therefore lifnei matan Torah even a goy could shecht. Raya ledovar. When the Shvatim came to Eretz Mitzrayim, Yosef knows who they are, but they don't know who he is. And Yosef tells his chef, who was an Egyptian chef, definitely not a Jew. There were no Jews in Eretz Mitzrayim. Tvoich tevach v'hochen. And the Gemara Chulin Tzadik Beis says, Pralehem beis hashchita, tulehem gid hanosha. So Yosef told the chef, give them kosher meat. Shecht the animals according to Jewish law, to Halacha. But the sheikhet was a guy. So obviously, this is my argument. There is no psul of lav bar zvicha before we had a mitzvah of zvicha, a mitzvah of shchita. That is one teretz. The other teretz would be the concept of Eina Kodesh Baruch Hu Mevi Tekol Al Yodam. Toises both in Chulin and in Gittin, I quoted before, says it is only b'midah achila because Toises brings various different sources in Shas. Even Gedolah Tenum or Nichshel B'Shoigig Ba'Avera. Rabbi Yishmael, Karo V'Hita, Hita is an B'Shabbos, and different sources. So Toises says it is only b'midah achila. Why? That is a takola. So once again, my argument is, before Matan Torah, when the others were Mekayim Kol HaMitzvahs, Kemisha Eina Mitzvah Voice, it was just a Midas Chasidus. The concept of takola is not Shayach. There was no takola, because the mitzvahs weren't given yet. And therefore, it's not Shayach to say, Eina Kodesh Baruch Hu Mevi Tekol Al Yodam. I am aware the Lashon of Chazal is behemton shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi tekol al yodam tzadikim atzman lo kol sheken. What shayach at the kola by a behema, by an animal? An animal has no level whatsoever of mitzvahs of avodas Hashem. But the Gemara in Chulin tells the story of Chamorah shel Reb Pinchas ben Yoam. Reb Pinchas ben Yoam's mule didn't want to eat tevel. And then the Gemara says ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi tekol al yodam. But I still argue, yes. But Tevel was a takola. Even a behema shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi tekol al yodam. But lifnei Matan Torah there is no takola, and therefore this entire concept is not shayach. I don't want to discuss once again what we discussed many times before. And in my Sefer Bereshis, it should be out very shortly, the new series, the new edition of Minchas Osher al Torah. And I discussed the fundamental idea of Kiyam Avram Avinu Kol HaTorah Kol HaShalei. There are two different approaches. Was Avram Avinu actually observant of all the mitzvahs, al protein, hilchoisein, v'digdukein, with all the little details, shetiknu chachamim? Maybe yes, that is one approach. But the other approach is, Chazal mean Tami HaMitzvahs, the Soides HaMitzvahs, the Kabbalah, the Yechudim and Tekunim, which are brought about in the performance of mitzvahs. But Chazal don't mean to say that Avraham Avinu was Makayim all the details of the various different mitzvahs. So that is a separate discussion. So we started the Shiur by a brief discussion, Pilpula Shel Torah, Divrei Drush, about Yitzchak eating the meat that Harav brought him, Esav brought him, Shlitas Mumar. Let's discuss a bit the din of a Mumar. So in Hilchas Rebbeis, it's just one of the sources. There are many sources of Shulchan Aruch dealing with din of Mumar, but I want to start off with Hilchas Rebbeis Kuf Nun Tes. Min HaTorah, there is no Isser Rebbeis by a goy. You could lend a goy money and collect interest. You could borrow from a goy and pay interest. By Nisor a goy, Min HaTorah, there is no Isser. Min HaRabbanan, there's an Isser. So Mumar mutar lahalavoy soy beribis, osa lilavot mimeno beribis. You could lend him beribis. Why? Beribis the pasuk says v'chai chichu imach. Einatu mitzuvalach yoiso. He's a Mumar kol HaTorah killer. He doesn't. He's a Mumar avodah zorah. Machal Shabbos beferesia. So you could lend him money beribis, but you cannot borrow from him beribis for two reasons. This is upon the loiva as well. On the borrower, and it's also livnei yevaloiset mechshel. He's a Mumar kol HaTorah kula, but he's still chayiv b'mitzvahs. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Mem Gimel Yisrael afal pishachoto Yisraelu. So there's an issa of livnei yever. The Taz Sif Kotten Gimel explains. So how could you lend him money with interest? Why is that not livnei yever? The ikaris the ribis is on the malva. If the malva is over, so is the loiva. But if the malva has a heter, so does the loiv. Sif Gimel, in that very same siman, Kuf Nun Tes, there's a machlokes machaber amor regarding a kuti. Who are the kutim? Many sources in Shas, Chazal deal with kutim. Different opinions. Matzes kuti kshera. The Gemara says, those mitzvahs that the kutim were makayim, they were more medaktik than even the Jews. However, Chulin Davov, the Gemara says, in the days of Rameir, they were checked, they were examined. And the Chachamim did some deep research. V'motzelem dumus yoina bahar gerizim, and it became clear that they're oivdei avodah zorah, v'osum kegoyim gemurim. That is what we find in Chulin Davov. Toisus, Chagigid Avchav Hayom Adarav says, all the Gemaras we find in different sources in Shas, about kutim, what is their status? Do they have namonos? All those discussions are before Rameir decreed Osam Kigoyim Gemurim. But in the days of Rameir, in the days of the Mishnah, when they were checked, analyzed, and they were found to be Oivdei Avodah Zorah, they were totally rejected. And so the Bes Yosef in Shulchan Aruch says, every kuti is a mumar, mutar lahalvoisen, osa lilvois mehem. The Namor brings an opinion, osa lahalvoisen. Stam kuti ein lo din mumar. Lo kedivra toises b'chagiga, v'yesh lahachmir. The Ramban, not only regarding kutim, afilu mumrim, the Ramban's opinion is la'avochicha, mutar lahalvoisen, v'mutar lilvois mehem. Shach Sif Koten Hay disagrees both with the Machaber and the Ramah, and the Shach says, Osam Kegoyim Gemurim. A kuti has no din Yisrael bein lahokel u bein lahachmir. And I think the Shach fits in nicely with Toises in Chagiga. And Persha Mishnah Rambam, Perek Ches Masechet Broches Mishnah Ches. The Rambam also says, whatever we find in Chazal, B'Shevach HaKutim, embracing, forthcoming, that is only before Motzu Lahem Demus Yoina Bahar Gerizim. So according to the Shach, there is no Lifnei Ever, because he's like a goy, like a Gentile, the Kutim, Bein LeKula, Bein LeChumra. There's a lengthy Chavez Das, I think it's Sif Koten Daled, Kuf Nun Tes. Chavez Das fundamentally agrees with the Shach, but he asks a very fundamental question. Ein koyach biyad chachomem laker duvem en Torah bekum vasei. That is a Gemara primarily in Yevomis Daf Tzadik, but also many sources in Shas. Chazal could override a dioraisa only b'shev al taisa. They could pater a person from performing various mitzvahs, but not bekume va'asei. So how could we say there is no lifnei ever by Akuti? So let me say this. In Minchas Osho, right at this moment, I don't remember exactly which siman that is, but I discussed a yesod that we find in Toises Yevomis Peches Amad Aleph Peites Amad Beis Nozir Mem Gimel Bedover Adoima Yesh Koyach Biat Chachom Emlaka Dover Men Torah Bekum Vasei. What does Dover Hadoima mean? Loosely translated, something that is similar. Similar to what? So what I say now is a big chiddush, and it doesn't fit in with all the sources, but it does fit in with some of the sources. Many times I spoke about a fundamental yesod, and I always express wonder that none of the Achronim really expounds and expands on this yesod. Nimsar adover lachachomim. In some sugyas, the Chachomim are not only commentators, but legislators, the way I put it. Nimsa dovel HaChachomim, divrei Chachomim, ki ikar divrei Torah heim. And I wrote various klalim. When do we say that? So in Minchas Usha Chumash Devorim, there's a lengthy discussion about this. I won't go over it. I don't recall which siman it is. So what I want to say is, when Chachomim come up with a takana, and it is very similar to a din dioraisa, Chachomim have the strength, the power, the authority to say, this is Menatayra. Just like A is Menatayra, so is B. We're dealing with Halacha, so let's say just like Aleph is Menatayra, so is Beis. Knowing it's not exactly similar. But it's a dover adoima, and the Chachomim think it's important. Yesh koyach b'yodam laker dover min haTorah bekum v'asei. So let me explain, according to this approach, how sensible the Shach's argument is. Who are the Kutim? Melochim Beis. We learn the story of the Kutim in Perek Yud Zayin. Melech Ashur, the king of Ashur, conquered the Shomron. All the Jews were sent into exile, and he brought Gentiles from distant lands to inhabit the land of Israel. And he brought Goyim from Kuta. Those people weren't Jewish at all. However, sitting in Eretz Yisrael, they converted. They converted to Yiddishkeit, to Yahadus. And there's a machlokes in Gemara, Kiddush Nafayin Hey, Gera Emesem or Gera Aroyesem, because in Navi, the story is that lions fed upon them from the desert or from the fields, from the savannah, and lions killed and devoured them, and that is when they turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they converted. And there's a machlokes in Gemara, was that proper conversion? A valid gerus or an invalid gerus? But the Kutim came from a distant land, from the land of Kuta. So we paskin gere emesheim. Their gerus was real, it was valid. But nevertheless, they sat in the Shomron. They built their own temple on Har Gerizim. They rejected Yerushalayim Yir HaKodesh. And they had Avodah Zorah there. So when the Chachamim decided, Osum Kigoyim Gemurim, it is Dovar Hadoima, their story was so similar as if they were another nation. They weren't part of Israel. They came from the Goyim. They went back to the Goyim. They sat amongst themselves. They had their own Mokom HaMikdash and Har Gerizim. They were Ovdei Alilim. Dover Adoime, Yesh Koyach Laka Dover Menator, Afilu Bekume V'asei. That would be my fundamental approach. But nevertheless, the Shach says, Kutim Goyim Gemurim Heim. Is there another precedent? We find the very same Loshen in Yevomis Yud Zayin. And there we're dealing now with Kutim, but with Aseres HaShavotim. Aseres HaShavotim were the 10 tribes in northern Israel, the northern kingdom, not the southern one. And they were exiled and they were lost. And there's a machlokes in the Gemara. Will they come back at the end of days, b'yamei Mashiach Tzedkeinu, or are they lost forever? And the Gemara in Yevomis Yud Zayin says, Lo yizazu misham ad she'osum kegoyim gemurim. So this idea we find twice in Shas. And it's a gewaldige chiddush. In Chulin Davov regarding the Kutim, Yevomis Yud Zayin regarding Aseres HaShvotim. The Kutim originally came from the Goyim, from a distant land. The Aseres HaShvotim were Bnei Yankov Avinu. They were Bosa Mipsorenu, Etzem Ma'atzmoiseinu, and Afar Piken, they were lost. They were exiled, and they were lost. So today, many organizations are finding Aseres HaShvotim. The Ethiopian Jews claim that they are part of Shevet Dan, which was one of the Aseres HaShvotim. But I don't want to go into a historical discussion, who and where and when, what's the story of the Aseres HaShvotim. But anyway, it is there that we also find the Yesod Asum Kegoyim Gemurim. Is that the authority of Chachmei Yisrael? We know that a Goy could become a Yid. But if a Goy does Gerus, Afal Pi Shechoto, Yisraelu. Once you're a Jew, you cannot become a non-Jew. A Jew is a Jew forever. A Yid is a Yid forever. Gewaldige Chiddush in Chsam Soifa Hagos Orachaim, Simen Lametet. Lametet is Silchas Tefillin. And I think that Amor writes that a Moisa is possible to write Tefillin. The Magen Avraham there brings, Sif Kot Dalet, is not a Bar Kshira. Kol she'eno b'kshira, eno b'ksiva. Why isn't he a Bar Kshira? Chsam Soifa writes a gewaldige Chiddush. Yesh koyach b'chalal Yisroel ahoitzi hamoirdim v'lahachziron le'umes u'olam. Klal Yisroel has a collective authority to reject those that don't want to be part of us, those that deny HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we could reject them, and they have a din of non-Jews. Seems to be shocking. So a Jew could become a non-Jew, according to some Sofer, doesn't depend on him. By choice, a Jew could never be a non-Jew. Conversion works one way, it doesn't work the other way around. But Klal Yisrael does have the authority to reject those that go against Elokei Yisrael, his people, and we could be moitzi them mechutz lamachan. Some Sofer writes two rayas. Rovi yeter goyim. Posik in Novi Chavakuk Gimel. Hitilehem sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So the Some Sofer writes, Afal Pisha ein ze raya gemura, but a remez. Of course it's not a raya gemura. Because in the beginning of Masechet Avodah Zorah, Daf Beis, Daf Gimel, the Gemara says, Rovi yate goyim, nimtzechoy teniska, roa sheinu mesuoy l'makayim sheva mitzvahs, hitiluhem. So the Gemara says, if somebody's not makayim mitzvahs, he's going to get a break. He's putter. Does that make sense? The Gemara says to the contrary, it was not to their benefit. Eino mekablam schar kamisha mitzvah v'oisa, ela kamisha eina mitzvah v'oisa. So what does the Chassam Sofer bring from there that we could reject someone and take him out of Klal Yisrael? So maybe there is a raya, because the problem the Gemara has with hite lehem sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach is only nimtza choyte niskar. But obviously, there is authority to pater them from mitzvahs. But what I don't understand, that Gemara doesn't deal with Jews at all. We're talking about umes oilam sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach. We're talking about b'nei noyach. What does it have to do with Klal Yisrael expelling lahoitzi min haklal, part of our nation, of our people, b'nei keil chai? We're dealing with a goyim, and we're dealing with a navi talking in the name of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. What does it have to do with Klal Yisrael rejecting part of our own? We're dealing with goyim, and we're dealing with a navi. Ain't a navi l'shana chadash dova miato, but that isn't Torah Yisrael. Maybe by the goyim it's different. So that definitely is not a raya. And then Chassam Sofer quotes a posuk in Ezra. He quotes no Chazal. So the posuk in Ezra, when Ezra comes and he makes such a great effort to bring the people from Golas Bavel, from Babylon, back to Eretz to build a Bayis Sheni. And most of the established people didn't want to come. Yochlem kol rechushoy v'hu yebodel mekahal hagoyla. Writes Chassam Sofer, yebodel meklal Yisrael. None of the Rishonim give us that pshat. Yebodel meklal Yisrael would it reasonable to say that those people that didn't come together with Ezra and Nehemiah to build Bayis Sheni were no longer Jews? In Sefer Ezra, mashma that dafka the important people and the established one didn't come. Asore Yochsen Olam Abuval. Most of them were psulei kohol, as we learn in Perek Daled and Masechet Kedushin. So anyway, the Chassam Sofer's proof is very flimsy, but it's a gewaldige chiddush. But what I want to point out is, this chiddush came to be 900 years before the Chassam Sofer. 600 years ago, 500 years ago, in the time of the Spanish Inquisition, there is so much discussion in Shalas Tshuvis regarding the Maranos, the Anusi. It's a huge sugya. What is the halachic status of the Jews in Spain and Portugal that converted to Christianity? Many of them kept Yiddishkeit in hiding, in concealment, in their basements, locked behind closed doors in their homes. Many of them were caught and tortured and killed by the Inquisition. Roughly, historians say, a third of the Jewish population was killed and murdered and tortured. A third converted to Christianity, and a third fled. They were given the option, leave the land. So Jews left, they fled Spain to Portugal, 1391. 1397, the Inquisition came to Portugal. They fled to Morocco, to Algiers. They came after them in Northern Africa as well. So anyway, there's a huge discussion about the status of the Anusim. Based on the Rambam, in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, Rivash, Siman Daled, Tashbates, and several different Simonim, Chuvas Maharashdam, Even Ezer, Siman Yud, many others argue that if you had an option to leave the land and you preferred to convert and not to leave the land, you would have a din of a Mumar, of a Mishumad. And what is the status of Mishumadim? The Marashdam writes, Mishumad shekidesh isho ein kiddush of kiddushin. He has a din of a Gentile. He brings a machlokes between Geoinim, Rabbeinu Sadiq and Rabbeinu Hanana. That was 900 years before the Chassam Sofer. Almost 900 years. So how could it be Meshumet Shekidish Ein Kiddush of Kiddushin. He doesn't. Lekula? How could that be? And the Marashdam argues that that is the opinion of the Gaonim. Rabbeinu Sadigon, Rabbeinu Hananel. They have a slight difference of opinion. Rabbeinu Sadigon says a Meshumet has no din Yisrael. Rabbeinu Hananel says he does, but his children and grandchildren that were born in Christianity don't have a din Yisrael at all, bein lekula, bein lechumra. And I think that must be the same point as the Chassam Sofer makes. And that is a gewaldige chiddush. Karaim have a different din of kutim. So the Shach argues kutim, even lakola, ein dinom ki Yisrael. I explained who the kutim were. Many years later, a similar discussion came up regarding mishumodim, those that converted to Christianity. Karaim, not the same level of chumrah. Sheikh Hanoch says Karaim do not have a din of mumrim. They didn't accept Torah Shabbal Peh. That definitely is apicorsis. But nobody says dinam kigoyim until the Radbaz. And that is a huge machlokes. Radbaz and Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrahi going back more than 500 years. Minchas Osha, Shalas Teshuvas, Chelak Aleph Siman Yud, I discussed this machlokes at length. The Radbaz argues, Karaim like the Kittim, dinam kigoyim. The Mizrahi says no, they have a din Yisrael kol davar. So let us just briefly summarize what we've been talking the past 10 minutes. Kutim, the source is the Shach. Bein lakula, bein lachumra. Lahalvis lehem velilomis mehen. Lending them ribis, borrowing from them, and paying ribis. Dinam kigoy lakol davar. That's the Shach regarding Kutim. Regarding Karaim, Machlokes Radbaz and Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrahi discussed at length Shalas Shuvas Minchas Osha, Chelak Aleph, Siman Yud. Regarding Mishumodim, the Rambam clearly writes, Perik Dalad Halacha Tesvav Hilchas Ishes, Meshumet Shekidish, Kiddush of Kiddushin. The Marashdam argues only Safek Kiddushin. In the new Rambam Shapsa Frankel, the Ger says Kiddushin Gemurim. But in Yalkut Shinui Nischois that we have at the back of the Frankel Rambam, there is a Gersa Kiddush of Kiddushin, not Gemurim. Obviously, that was the Nusach, the Gersa that the Marashdam had. 200 years ago, when there was a major battle in all the Hungarian communities, the Orthodox against the Neologim. The Neologim were the reformists, Reform Jews, bred by the Haskalah. And the Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer were the spearhead, establishing the orthodoxy, or the orthodoxia, orthodoxy as the Hungarians pronounced it, and those are the frum communities. And they fought over every little town, every little hamlet, and every kill and every city. And there was a major discussion between the Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer. How should we relate to those Reform Jews that went against the entire halachic Mesorah, and they adapted so many non-Jewish minhagim, and with a total zilzul of halacha. Interesting, Tshuvas Mishnah Halachas, Hagon Reb Menashe Klein, who was a generation older than me, or even more, but we had a very close relationship. Our families were very close. Chelek Yud Zayin, Tshuvas Mishnah Halachas in Machof Aleph. He was asked about a boy. He got engaged to a girl, and then he heard that the girl's great-grandfather was a leader of one of the Neologan shuls in Hungary, a Reform Jew. Could we marry his granddaughter? So the Menashe Klein writes that he heard from the Yokeruv that in the days when the Orthodoxia was established, there was a discussion, and the Maram Shik insisted, no psul yerksen. They are Jews. They went astray. We need to fight them. We need to do our best to be mechanech our children, l'Torah v'le'Mesorah, but they're still Jews. And we should make no effort pushing them over the fence and decreeing that they no longer have a din of Jews. That's an interesting Mesorah because it goes against Shuvas Maramshik. Shuvas Maramshik or Chaim Shin Hey, there's a letter that Maramshik writes to the Ksav Sofer, the great son of the Chassam Sofer, Mamala Makoimoy. Fascinating document, Shuvas Maramshik or Chaim Shin Hey. And he writes to the Ksav Sofer to encourage him, and he says, I don't know why everyone is quiet, why everyone is silent. We should make a machoa ad leiv hashumayim. We should fight this new tendency. We should fight the Reformed Jews. We should fight their kehilas. We need to make a stand, and we need to say whatever we have to say. Bekoil godol. And he writes, Yesh lohoitziam min haklal yenom yeyen nesach benoiseim asurois. However, Reb Chaim Sofer, who was also a Talmud of Chassam Sofer, one of the younger Talmidim, and he was the Av based in Munkach, and it was a big Hanoi. And in his Sefer, Ken Sofer, there are letters that he corresponds with the Maramshik, and Reb Chaim Sofer wants to go all the way, very harsh, and Dafkan, those letters, the Maramshik is more lenient. So there seems to be a basis for the Mesorah that Reb Menashe Klein quotes, and some contradiction. So I think that letter that's printed in Maramshik was addressed to the Ksav Sofer. And in that letter he wanted to make a machoa and rally. It was a rallying cry. Rally the Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer, the great Gedolim of Hungary, to make a stand, to their voice should be heard, and to make a powerful stand against the Reform Kehilas. But when it boiled down to Halacha Lamaisa, I think the Maramshik was reluctant. This question starts in Shuvas Chassam Sofer Chelik Vav Semen Peitet. Because in the days of the Chassam Sofer, this already brewed. And Moshe Mendelssohn was older, Lahavdil, older than the Chassam Sofer. And the Haskalah was already quite powerful in Germany. It actually came to Hungary after the Chassam Sofer's Ptira, but the Chassam Sofer was aware of what's happening in the German Kehilas, and the Chassam Sofer writes, if we would have the power, we should be Moitzi Oisa Mechutz Leklal Yisrael. If we would have the power. And obviously the Chassam Sofer recognized we don't. Not the legal power, because it was against the rule and the law of the land. So this was an interesting discussion and controversy. Halacha Lamaisa. They have a halachic status of Jews that have a terrible mistake. And we want no cooperation with them. But it was only Chazal, or the great Rishonim and Gaonim of 1,000 years ago, that had the power. Lahoitzi min haklal. No longer in recent generations. And today, we have thousands, tens of thousands of Jews coming back from outside. Many of them are descendants of Neologan, of Reform Jews, of Maskilim. Who knows from where? It's totally secular for generations. So Baruch Hashem, all of them are part of Klal Yisrael. And when they come back, we will and should embrace them all. So today, we had a fascinating discussion about various sects in Klal Yisrael, starting off with the Kutim, the earliest, Karoim, Anusim in the days of the Spanish Inquisition, Reform Jews, and the various different opinions between Gedolei Yisrael in each and every one of these different times and different situations. So we go all the way back to Yaakov and Esav. Yisroitzatzu abonim bekirba. Rashi brings, but the Knesias Yaakov mefarches letzeis. But the Avodah Zorah, Esav wants to go and din Avodah Zorah. Another Perish Omer Iv Menach L'Shnei Olamos. And that fight goes on till the end of days. It started before Yaakov and Esav were born. And it won't be over till Bias Moshiach Tzidkenu B'Korov B'Yomeinu. So in this week's parsha, we learn primarily first about the Bechorah and then about the Brochas. And if we learn these parshas Lefi Pshuton, Yaakov doesn't appear to be entirely a Ishtam Yoshev Oihalim. I think we learn these sugyas according to the Zohar HaKadosh. Totally different perspective and a profound understanding. The Zohar says when Yaakov tries to get the Bechorah out of Esav and he takes advantage of Esav's desperation. Why does Yaakov need the Bechorah? It has nothing to do with his own benefit. It has nothing to do with him. Yaakov knows Beruach Kodsha, Beruach HaKodesh. Bechorah and Brocha are the same letters. The Zohar says the Brochas are designated for the Bechorah. Yaakov needs the Bechorah only because he needs the Brochas. And actually Yaakov is the Bechorah. Beni Bechori Yisrael, the Navi says. But Yaakov wants to cement that right. And he wants to make sure that there will be no question. Yaakov needs the Bechorah to get the Brochas, the Zohar explains. And why does he need the Brochas? So the Zohar goes into detail. Yaakov during his lifetime got 4 different sets of Brochas. The most important ones are the ones from this week's parasha. The ones he achieves from Yitzchak b'mirama. The conspiracy of Rivka together with Yaakov to get Esav's Brochas out of Yitzchak. When Yitzchak is afraid for Yaakov's life, and he tells him, go to Padan Aram, v'yevorech oisai. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nigler Yaakov Avinu, and he gets the 3rd Brocha. And the final ones are the climax in Parshas Vayishlach, v'ye'ovek ish imoi, Ada lo yisashachar, lo yeshalechacho ki im birechtoni, and the Malach benches him once again. The Zohar explains, Yaakov had a very difficult lifetime, many trials and tribulations, but for himself Yaakov takes the lesser brochas, the ones that are least important. They were all important, but out of the 4, Yaakov for himself takes the brochas that Yitzchak benched him when he leaves Yitzchak's home on his way to Lavan. The other 3 brochas are for Klal Yisrael throughout the generations. And we were Zoiche in Geulas Mitzrayim and in Binyan Beis HaMikdash Harisha, in the first Beis HaMikdash, in the merit of 1 brocha. We were Zoiche of Geulas Bavel and Binyan Bayis Sheni, in the merit of another brocha. And the most important brochas, the ones of this week's Parsha, are the ones that will ultimately bring us out of Golos Edom, and we will be Zoiche to the Bayis HaShlishi, to Yeshua Seilamim, and to the Geula Shalema. That is why Yaakov needs the brachas, and that is why Yaakov needs the Bechorah. Only by getting the Bechorah does he know he will have the brachas. And when we learn the Zohar, everything gets a different perspective. It's not about Yaakov. But I still ask, why was it Min HaShamayim that Yaakov will get these brachas b'derech mirmo? Why did that need to be? And why couldn't Yaakov get the brachas in an honest, straightforward, clear way? There will come times in which it won't be obvious who's Yaakov and who's Esav. There won't be that much of a difference. It already happened. By Kriyas Yamsov, Chazal says, Sora Shel Yam argued, Manishtan Elo Me Elo, Alolo Evda by the Zora, Alolo Evda by the Zora. Why should I split for the Jews and not for the Egyptians? They don't seem to be that much different. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is the way I want it to be. The Novi Malachi, who was the last Novi, says, Ahavti eschem Rom Hashem, v'amartem b'mei ahavtonu. Haloi ach Esav liYankov. V'ohav es Yankov, ves Esav sunesi. I love you. Why? How? How do we know? Yaakov and Esav are two brothers. I love Yaakov and I hate Esav. And the Navi seems to say, it's not because they're that much different, but this is the way I want it to be. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. So at the end of days, many Jews won't be that much different from their Goyish friends, but they still will be redeemed. So dafka these brachas that will make the ultimate difference, and it is the merit of these brachas that we will be zoich at the end of days to Agula Shlema, were given to Yaakov when Yaakov actually appeared to be Esav. And there was no difference between Yaakov and Esav. And Yitzchak actually thought that he's bestowing these brachas on Esav. And from Yitzchak's perspective, Yaakov got them by mistake. This is the way it had to be min hashamayim. Because we will need these brachas at the end of days, whether we deserve them or not. And some of us, many of us, right now, the majority of us, appears to be not that much different than Esav. Va'af al pikein. These are the brachas that will get us out of the golus. These are the brachas that will bring us all home. Home to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, home to Eretz Yisrael, home to Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, home to Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'Mehero V'Yomeinu. Amen.